Operation Wandering Soul was undertaken by the United States military in an attempt to push back northern Vietnamese soldiers and southern guerrilla warriors, more commonly known as Viet Cong, into defecting or abandoning their cause. Where did the idea come from? According to PsyWarrior.com, it stems from the real belief in the wandering soul. According to Vietnamese tradition, if you're not buried in your homeland or given a proper burial, your soul is left to wander the earth in torment. Honoring the dead is also a very common practice. The Vietnamese people had a holiday meant for contacting and honoring their past loved ones. It's called Vu Lan Day. Reportedly, it's one of the biggest holidays celebrated in the nation. The holiday comes from the story of a young boy whose mother had died and was being tormented. He asked Buddha how he could help her, and from there stems the ceremony of giving offerings to past loved ones and using lights to guide them back home. When thinking of a war strategy, most people would prefer to go with the most peaceful option. However, I think it can be agreed upon that taking advantage of one's spiritual beliefs could be considered foul. It is the same concept as threatening a Catholic with hell after they've been at war and had taken lives. They start questioning themselves, asking if it was justified. It confuses and demoralizes, which is the main reason the military chose this tactic. Personally, I believe that psychological warfare in this case was justifiable. As already stated, the aim of Wandering Soul was meant to convince the enemy to give up fighting and to go home. The tapes they played had extremely grim messages and often had terrible groaning and the sounds of Buddhist funeral music playing in the background. Soldiers holed up in foxholes could often expect to hear ghosts speaking, children asking where their fathers were, and wives worried about their husbands, and of course already dead soldiers warning those still living to return home before they too died in vain. As seen in militaryhistory.com, the operation was done in a number of ways thanks to technology. A couple of common methods of projection were soldiers who would wander the forest wearing PA systems on their backs, broadcast audios, and they would also set up speakers in trees and even broadcast from low-flying planes. The effectiveness was fairly evident within the first couple weeks of their trials. For the most part, a lot of the intended effects followed through as planned. A former captain of the Northern Vietnamese Army stated that while in the field they would listen to these audios all night. And since they were human, it certainly affected their spirits. However, an unintended effect was that it caused them to be more determined. He stated that the audios reminded them of what they were fighting for and the things that they missed. In the end, the morale was still low, but the same determination remained. The tapes were not only effective against Northern Vietnamese soldiers, in PsyWarrior it said that the Americans were specifically instructed not to play anywhere near Southern Vietnamese troops. Other susceptible groups included civilians who would have to listen to the tapes in their homes when they would play near villages, as well as the Northern Vietnamese would simply fire to where they heard noise coming from PA systems. And unfortunately, this left a lot of American troops vulnerable to attack. Now that we've gone over the intent of the tapes and its effectiveness, let's revisit whether or not it was really moral to do. Again, we can agree that using one's religious beliefs against them is normally a bad thing to do. We have to consider the situation, though. A lot of people were already dying in Vietnam. Getting the enemy to defect instead of simply mowing them down with bullets is an admirable choice, considering that simply mowing them down with bullets would have been a lot easier to do and would have been a lot safer for them to do as well. After researching, I also concluded that the Catholic Church actually has no official stance on psychological warfare itself, but they do have a stance on war and what makes a war just. If we hold psychological warfare to the same standard, the 3 points include that it must be waged with the right intention, not vengefully nor to inflict harm, that it must be waged by lawful public authority in defense of the common good, and it must be waged for a just cause. The United States was fighting to keep communism out of Vietnam, which would have led millions to death if it followed the same path as Russia. There was no act of vengeance or seeking revenge, since Vietnam had never actually harmed the American states, and the United States used Operation Wandering Soul in an attempt to spare lives they otherwise would have taken. And lastly, of course, the United States is a lawful public authority. In the end, looking back and deciding on what was right and what was wrong is always difficult to do. Using facts and, of course, religious guidance, we are all able to form our own opinions.